the fact that, for example, next week in the Dáil, we will be discussing a report where Amnesty International have called for comprehensive sanctions against the war crimes and crimes against humanity by Israel against Palestine, and they are calling for sanctions. Now, I guarantee you the European Union will not support sanctions against Israel. I guarantee you our government will not support sanctions against Israel because they have repeatedly refused to. So I cannot help but call out the double standards. Why is it that instantaneously NATO, our government and European leaders will say instantly sanctions against Ukraine, against Russia, but trenchantly refuse sanctions against Israel for what Amnesty are now calling crimes against humanity, seizure of land, annexation of territory? Why will they not call for sanctions against Saudi Arabia for a war it is conducting as we speak in Yemen and is being armed to the teeth by the United States, by France and the UK? And I guarantee you, Claire, they will not call for sanctions. We have a briefing in the Dáil again this week with people from Yemen who are calling for sanctions against Saudi, and none of the people who are now essentially banging the drums of war and supporting the eastward expansion of NATO, they will not support sanctions. Now, those double standards actually feed the psychopathy of people like Putin.
But as we sit here and we see, I'm looking at the pictures right now on the screen in Kyiv, bombs are falling, the attack is happening, and we sit here, the West sits here, hand-wringing. Are you okay with that, or do you think that more should be done, or are the implications of going in there just too much to bear?
Well, I mean, I think the people who are saying, you know, more should be done need to spell out what they're talking about. They need to say what they're talking about, because the implication is we should send in troops, and I absolutely am opposed to that. That would be an absolute disaster.
Sorry, just to be clear, you're against sending in Irish troops, obviously. We're not a member of NATO or any NATO
troops. Throwing petrol on this fire will be an absolute disaster and will escalate the war to proportions that are too scary to even contemplate. Now, if you want to see hope in all of this terrible scenario, look at the protests in St. Petersburg last night by Russians. There's the hope. How was the warmongering of the big powers in the First World War, and by the way, I think the analogy is more the First World War than the Second World War here, how was that war ended? It was ended by an anti-war movement across the world, and indeed revolutions across the world, including in Russia, demanding an end to the war. And we are starting to see, within hours of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, we're seeing masses of people take to the streets. We're going to be protesting outside the Russian embassy on Monday at 5 o'clock. There were anti-war protests in the United States, across the world yesterday. We need to build an international movement against war.
Gabia, the messaging from our own Minister for Foreign Affairs, Simon Coveney, is it fair to say you're a bit concerned about mentions of neutrality?
Yeah, Minister Coveney making it very clear that we're not being neutral on this. I mean, what does that mean? And I think Richard Boy Barrett bringing in that point of we absolutely should not be sending in Irish troops anywhere. But, you know, if you're talking about that we're not being neutral, so what does it mean then? And I think the really big fear in Eastern Europe now is this war going to be confined to Ukraine, or is it actually going to spread to other countries? And if it does spread to other countries, what does that mean for Ireland?